I think I figured when I came here, that's what I came here to do.
Toward the end of his life, Kris Kristofferson did something unexpected. He began documenting the truths he had spent years carrying. Through personal writings, he reflected on relationships, regrets, and choices that shaped both his career and personal life. Those who knew about these confessions described them as deeply revealing, even surprising. But what stood out most wasn't just what he admitted. It was why he chose to do it when he did. As his life slowed down, it seemed he was finally ready to confront everything he had left unsaid. The most unlikely country star. Kris Kristofferson always came across like a walking contradiction, in the best way possible. On one hand, he was deeply intellectual, the kind of guy who could hold his own in any academic room. On the other, he was physically tough, a Golden Gloves boxer who knew how to take a hit and keep moving. That mix of brains and grit would end up defining his entire journey. He was raised in a strict military household, with his father, Lars Henry Kristofferson, serving as a major general in the U.S. Air Force. Because of that life, stability wasn't really part of his childhood.
And I think they didn't want to put that title on that.
The family moved constantly, bouncing from place to place, until they finally settled in San Mateo, California, during his teenage years. After all that movement, staying in one place must have felt almost unfamiliar. Following the path laid out in front of him, Kristofferson stepped into the military world himself and became an Army Ranger. Everything about his life at that point suggested he was on track for a long, decorated career. But underneath all that discipline, something else was growing. A pull toward creativity that refused to stay quiet. Before music ever took center stage, though, sports were a huge part of who he was. At Pomona College, he threw himself into athletics with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He boxed, played football, and ran track. He wasn't the biggest or fastest guy on the field, but what he lacked in natural ability, he made up for with sheer determination. Coaches and professors saw it clearly. He wasn't winning because it came easy. He was winning because he refused to quit. Rugby, however, became his true passion. It wasn't just a game to him, it was something he helped build. When the Pomona Rugby Club had all but disappeared after World War II, Kristofferson and a few others brought it back to life in 1957. That same drive to rebuild and push forward would show up again and again in his life.
When I saw, God, there's another lunatic out there, it was like...
At the same time, another side of him was beginning to take shape. He started writing, and it didn't take long for people to notice. He won a short story contest sponsored by the Atlantic Monthly, a moment that hinted at something bigger. Encouraged by his professors, he aimed even higher and applied for a Rhodes Scholarship. It almost didn't happen. After a rough first round of interviews, he was ready to walk away from the opportunity completely. But one of his mentors refused to let him quit, pushing him to try again. That decision changed everything. Kristofferson ended up winning the scholarship and headed to Oxford University, where he studied English literature at Merton College. Even in that academic setting, he didn't leave his physical side behind. He joined both the rugby and boxing teams and excelled to the point of earning the Blue, one of Oxford's highest honors for student athletes. It was another reminder that he wasn't just one thing, he was always operating on multiple levels at once. By the early 1960s, he had built a life that most people would consider ideal. He was educated, respected, and positioned for a stable future.
It seems to still influence my music today with all those simple harmonies, and the emotion that they...
He got married to his longtime girlfriend, Fran Beer, and for a moment, it looked like everything was falling into place. But reality came fast. His novel was rejected. His responsibilities grew, and the pressure to provide became very real when their daughter Tracy was born in 1962. With bills piling up, he returned fully to the military, joining the U.S. Army as a captain. He trained as a helicopter pilot, following in his father's footsteps, and also completed the grueling Ranger School. Soon, he was stationed in West Germany with the 8th Infantry Division, living what many would consider an elite military life.
Just gave me a big hug and he said, "Now you're going to get the Rhodes Scholarship."
But even there, the music never left him. While stationed overseas, he formed a band and started writing songs more seriously. It was no longer just an interest. It was becoming something he couldn't ignore. When he returned to the United States, his life seemed locked into place. His family was growing, and he was even offered a prestigious position teaching English at West Point. It was the kind of opportunity people spend their entire lives chasing: secure, respected, and guaranteed. And then, just weeks before stepping into that role, everything changed. A trip to Nashville flipped a switch. Being around music, around songwriters and performers, made it clear that this was where he truly belonged. Walking away from West Point wasn't just a risky decision. It was almost unthinkable. But he did it anyway. He stayed in Nashville and took a job as a janitor at Columbia Records, doing whatever it took to stay close to the music. It was a humbling fall on the surface, going from Army captain and Oxford scholar to sweeping floors and emptying trash. But to him, it wasn't a step down. It was a step toward something real. While he cleaned studios, he watched legends at work, studied the craft up close, and waited for his moment. That decision didn't sit well with his family. They saw it as throwing everything away, and the disappointment cut deep. At one point, the relationship became so strained that they essentially cut him off. Instead of breaking him, that moment freed him. With nothing left to prove and no expectations to live up to, he went all in on music. The gamble came with consequences. Supporting a family on a janitor's salary was tough, and the pressure only grew when his son, Kris Jr., was born with health complications. Medical bills stacked up quickly, adding even more strain to an already fragile situation. Eventually, the weight of it all led to the breakdown of his marriage, and by 1969, he and Fran went their separate ways. Still, Kristofferson kept pushing. During those early Nashville days, he found a way to get his music into the right hands. While working at the studio, he crossed paths with June Carter Cash and passed along a demo, hoping it might reach Johnny Cash. At first, nothing came of it. The tapes didn't get the attention he was hoping for, so he took matters into his own hands, literally. At the time, he had access to helicopters through a job in Louisiana. In a move that sounded more like a movie scene than real life, he landed a helicopter on Johnny Cash's property just to get noticed. It was bold, borderline reckless, and completely unforgettable. The story would grow over time, with different versions adding their own details, but the core of it remained true. He made sure his music couldn't be ignored. And eventually, it paid off. The song he was pushing, Sunday Mornin' Comin' Down, found its way to Johnny Cash. While another artist, Ray Stevens, recorded it first without much impact, Cash's version in 1970 changed everything. The song shot to #1 on the country charts and earned Song of the Year at the CMA Awards. Just like that, the janitor who had been sweeping floors in the background became one of the most respected songwriters in the industry. The rise that nearly collapsed. Kris Kristofferson's music career had barely found its footing when Hollywood came calling. It was around 1970, right as his first album was entering the world, and already another door was opening. His introduction to film was about as small as it gets. In 1971, he appeared in Dennis Hopper's film The Last Movie, playing a minor role with just a single line at the very beginning. He had never been on a movie set before, and it showed. He was stepping into a completely different world, trying to find his place in an industry he didn't fully understand yet. But that one moment was enough to get him in the room. Later that same year, he landed a much bigger opportunity, starring alongside established names like Karen Black and Gene Hackman in Cisco Pike. Just like that, he wasn't just testing the waters anymore. He was in it. Around the same time, his personal life took a turn just as fast as his career. Not long after his divorce from Fran Beer, he met Rita Coolidge in 1971 during a flight from Los Angeles to Memphis. What started as a simple conversation turned into something deeper before the plane even landed. They talked the entire flight, and by the time they reached their destination, there was already a sense that this connection wasn't temporary. Instead of continuing on with his plans, Kristofferson stayed with her. The bond formed quickly, almost intensely, as if both of them recognized something undeniable in the other. Within a short time, they were building a life together, eventually marrying in 1973. As a couple, they became a powerful creative force, performing together and earning Grammy Awards along the way. That same year marked a major turning point in his acting career as well. He stepped into a leading role in Sam Peckinpah's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, sharing the screen with James Coburn and Bob Dylan. It was a strong statement that he wasn't just experimenting with acting, he was becoming a serious presence in film. From there, the momentum didn't slow. In 1974, he appeared alongside Ellen Burstyn in Martin Scorsese's Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, further cementing his place in Hollywood. By the mid-1970s, he had transformed from a rising songwriter into a full-fledged leading man. Then came 1976, and one of the biggest moments of his film career, A Star Is Born, where he starred opposite Barbra Streisand. Interestingly, he hadn't been the original choice for the role. Streisand, who was also producing the film, initially envisioned Elvis Presley as the lead. Elvis even showed interest, seeing it as a chance to revive his film career. But negotiations fell apart once his manager began making heavy demands that the studio refused to meet. With the deal collapsing, the opportunity shifted to Kristofferson. What could have been a missed chance for him turned into a defining moment. He stepped into the role and delivered a performance that resonated with both audiences and critics. The film was a success, and both he and Streisand were awarded Golden Globes. It was a peak moment, one that seemed to confirm he had fully arrived as both a musician and an actor. But while his professional life was reaching new heights, his personal life was beginning to fracture. His marriage to Rita Coolidge was under growing strain. Behind the scenes, they were dealing with deep challenges, including the emotional toll of a miscarriage. Their relationship, once fueled by passion and creativity, had become unstable. One of the major pressures came from Kristofferson's drinking, which added tension to an already fragile situation. Even when he later made the decision to get sober, it didn't immediately fix things. In some ways, it created a new distance. The version of him that Rita had known for years had changed, and adjusting to that shift wasn't easy. At the same time, their careers were pulling them in different directions. While Kristofferson's acting career was expanding rapidly, Coolidge was finding major success in her own music, including the hit song, We're All Alone. What once brought them together now seemed to be pushing them apart. There were also accusations of infidelity and emotional strain, with both sides carrying their own version of what went wrong. What was clear, though, was that the relationship had become deeply painful. For Coolidge, it reached a point where staying no longer made sense, especially with their daughter Casey growing up in the middle of it. The breaking point came amid controversy tied to Kristofferson's work on the 1976 film The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. Explicit promotional images from the project were published publicly, creating a storm that went beyond the film itself. What was meant to be part of his professional work spilled into his personal life in a way that couldn't be contained. The fallout added even more tension to an already strained marriage. By 1979, the relationship had come to an end, closing a chapter that had once seemed full of promise, but ultimately couldn't withstand the pressure. As one chapter ended, another began. In 1980, director Michael Cimino cast Kristofferson as the lead in Heaven's Gate. At the time, Cimino was coming off massive success with The Deer Hunter, which had won Best Picture at the Oscars. Expectations were high, and the project was seen as something big. But what followed became one of the most infamous stories in Hollywood history. The production spiraled out of control, with costs rising far beyond expectations. What started as a major studio film turned into a financial disaster. The budget ballooned to tens of millions, far exceeding what was typical at the time, and the film's length became another issue, with early cuts running close to 4 hours. When it was finally released, the response was brutal. Critics rejected it, audiences stayed away, and the box office returns were nowhere near enough to recover the cost. The film ended up losing massive amounts of money and played a role in nearly destroying United Artists as a studio. For Kristofferson, the impact was personal as well as professional. The momentum he had built throughout the 1970s suddenly stalled. The industry that had once embraced him now saw him differently, and opportunities became harder to come by. His career would recover over time, but that moment marked a shift. The run he had been on, the steady climb from struggling songwriter to Hollywood leading man, had been interrupted in a way that was hard to fully bounce back from. The birth of the Highwaymen. In 1984, something unexpected started to take shape during what was supposed to be a simple trip. Johnny Cash had traveled to Switzerland to film a Christmas television special, and he brought along a few close friends to share the stage: Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Kris Kristofferson. On paper, it was just another performance, but once the cameras stopped rolling, something real began to happen. Back at the hotel, the four of them sat around, passing guitars, trading songs, and just playing for the love of it. No pressure, no audience, just music. In that moment, it became clear there was something special in the room. What started as a casual jam session sparked a bigger idea. What if they actually made this official? For Cash, the timing couldn't have been more important. His career had hit a rough patch, and the success he once enjoyed wasn't coming as easily anymore. Being surrounded by those three, friends, peers, and legends in their own right, gave him a sense of renewed energy. It felt like a reset, a reminder of why he started in the first place. Of course, putting together a group like that wasn't going to be simple. Each of them had a voice so distinct it could carry a record on its own. Blending those styles, especially when it came to harmonizing, proved to be tricky. That's when an idea came in that changed everything. A song called Highwaymen offered the perfect solution. Instead of forcing them into traditional harmonies, it gave each man his own verse, his own character, and his own space to shine. 4 voices, 4 stories, all tied together. Just like that, the challenge turned into an advantage. Cash immediately connected with the concept and had one specific request. He wanted the verse about the starship. It was a small detail, but it showed how invested he already was in bringing the song to life. That spontaneous moment in Switzerland ended up giving birth to one of country music's most iconic collaborations, the Highwaymen. When they recorded Highwaymen, it didn't just work, it exploded. The song climbed to #1 on the country charts and earned a Grammy Award in 1985. It became the defining track of the group and proof that this wasn't just a novelty, it was something real. But behind the success, they were still 4 strong personalities sharing one stage. The bond between them was genuine, but like any group of close friends, there were moments of tension. Small disagreements would come and go, arguments over set lists, who had more songs, or just the natural friction that comes from working closely together. It wasn't unusual for things to get heated and then settle just as quickly. At their core, they operated like brothers. There was respect, there was love, and every now and then, there was a little bit of conflict. One of the more noticeable differences came from how they viewed their role as performers. Kristofferson, especially as time went on, became more vocal about his political beliefs and wasn't afraid to express them on stage. Jennings, on the other hand, believed strongly that concerts were meant for music, not messages. He preferred to keep things focused on entertainment. Even with that difference in perspective, there was no real divide. They understood each other. They didn't always agree, but they respected where the other was coming from. And when it came time to perform, they still showed up together. Between 1985 and the mid-1990s, the Highwaymen built something that went far beyond a single hit. They recorded 3 albums, toured extensively, and even appeared together in a film adaptation of Stagecoach. It was a full creative partnership, not just a one-time collaboration. For Kristofferson, the experience carried a deeper meaning. Years earlier, he had been a struggling songwriter in Nashville, working as a janitor in the very studios where artists like these recorded their music. Now, he was standing beside them as an equal. It wasn't lost on him. There was a quiet sense of disbelief in how far he had come, from cleaning up after his heroes to sharing the spotlight with them. Still, not every chapter of the group's journey reached the same heights. While their first album was a major success, the follow-up releases didn't capture the same level of attention. By the time their third album arrived in 1995, the momentum had slowed, and it quietly became their final project together. When everything started falling apart. By the time Kris Kristofferson reached his 70s, life started throwing challenges at him that no amount of grit or talent could simply push aside. It began with a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, a condition that brought intense muscle pain and spasms. The discomfort was so severe that he had to step away from work for months at a time, something that would have been unthinkable during his younger years. But that was only the beginning. As time went on, more symptoms started to creep in. He lost his sense of smell. His awareness of space around him became unreliable. Then came the memory issues, small at first, but gradually becoming harder to ignore. For a man whose life had been built on words, storytelling, and sharp thinking, that kind of decline was deeply unsettling. Naturally, his mind went to the worst-case scenario. Alzheimer's disease became a real fear. And in true Kristofferson fashion, he didn't just sit with that fear. He tried to turn it into something creative. He began writing about it, pouring those emotions into an unfinished song that painted a haunting picture of confusion and fading memory. It reflected a man trying to hold on to himself while feeling parts of his identity slowly slip away. At the same time, his body seemed to be fighting battles on multiple fronts. After finishing work on the film Disappearances in 2006, doctors diagnosed him with severe sleep apnea. He was given a CPAP machine to help manage it, but he resisted using it. Alongside that, he dealt with chronic knee pain that required regular treatment. And he had already undergone bypass surgery years earlier. Eventually, he also needed a pacemaker to regulate his heart. For years, doctors treated him for Alzheimer's and depression, trying to manage what they believed was a steady cognitive decline. But then, everything changed. After a long stretch of uncertainty and incorrect treatment, it was discovered that he had been misdiagnosed. The real cause of his symptoms wasn't Alzheimer's at all. It was Lyme disease. That revelation flipped the entire situation on its head. What had looked like irreversible decline was actually a condition that could be treated. In 2016, testing confirmed the diagnosis, and suddenly, there was a new path forward. Looking back, there had been signs. His earlier fibromyalgia diagnosis may have been a clue that something else was going on. There was also a strong possibility that he had contracted the illness years earlier, possibly while working on a film in the early 2000s. But at the time, none of it had been connected. Lyme disease, caused by bacteria carried through tick bites, can be difficult to detect. While some people develop the well-known bullseye rash, others show no obvious signs at all. When left untreated, it can affect the heart, joints, and even the brain, causing symptoms that closely mimic neurological conditions like Alzheimer's. Once Kristofferson began receiving the correct treatment, the improvement was dramatic. Those close to him noticed a clear change in his memory and awareness. It felt, to many, like watching someone return after slowly fading away for years. Still, time had taken its toll. Even with his health stabilizing, Kristofferson began to step back from the spotlight. There was no grand announcement, no farewell tour, no dramatic goodbye. He simply eased out of public life, letting the transition happen quietly. By 2021, it was officially confirmed that he had retired. But even that word didn't fully capture what was happening. It wasn't a sudden decision. It was more like a natural slowing down. Touring stopped. Appearances became rare. But the music itself never really left him. He settled into a quieter life in Hawaii, far from the noise of the industry that had once defined him. Days were spent doing simple things, working on his land, riding his tractor, and enjoying the peace of being surrounded by open space. After decades of constant motion, he seemed content staying still. His focus shifted toward family and reflection. He thought more about legacy, about how he wanted to be remembered, and even about the words that might one day mark his resting place. There was a sense of acceptance in that stage of his life, a recognition that the journey had been long and full. He also began simplifying things, letting go of certain properties and possessions. It wasn't about walking away. It was about making things easier for the people he would eventually leave behind. Even in retirement, though, the connection to music never fully disappeared. In 2023, during a celebration for Willie Nelson's 90th birthday, Kristofferson stepped back onto the stage for a special performance. It wasn't a comeback or a return to touring. It was something more personal, a reminder that no matter how far he stepped back, music would always be a part of him. Then, in September 2024, Kris Kristofferson passed away at his home in Hana, Hawaii, at the age of 88. Before dying, Kris Kristofferson confessed the truth, but for good reason. In his later years, Kris Kristofferson became a much more reflective man. After decades of living fast, chasing dreams, and navigating both fame and personal struggles, he started looking back on it all with a different kind of honesty. People close to him revealed that he kept a personal diary, something that became a quiet space where he could unpack his past in his own words. According to those familiar with it, the diary wasn't just casual notes or scattered thoughts. It was detailed, deeply personal, and at times brutally honest. He wrote about the people who left an impression on him, especially the women who had been part of his life. and there were many. His romantic history had always been intense, passionate, and sometimes complicated, and it seemed he didn't shy away from documenting any of it. At one point, even his connection with Barbra Streisand found its way into that chapter of his life story. Before things became serious with Rita Coolidge, there had been a brief romantic link between him and his A Star Is Born co-star. It was one of those moments that reflected who he was at the time: restless, charismatic, and moving quickly through relationships without always slowing down to sort through the consequences. That same energy followed him into his marriage with Rita Coolidge, a relationship that was filled with both creative highs and personal struggles. While their time together eventually ended in divorce, the years that followed brought a different kind of connection. With distance and time, they found a way to rebuild their relationship as friends, something that spoke to a deeper level of understanding between them. As Kristofferson reflected on his life, he didn't just focus on the good moments, he also faced his regrets. His struggles with alcohol were a major part of that story, and he was open about how difficult that chapter had been. Overcoming it wasn't easy, but it became something he fought through, especially for the sake of his family. Eventually, he found lasting stability with Lisa Myers, the woman who would become his partner for decades. That relationship brought a sense of grounding that had been missing in earlier years. It marked a different phase of his life, one that was less about chaos and more about connection, family, and peace. Those who spoke about his diary often described him as a complicated man, someone who carried both light and weight within him. There was a sense that writing everything down wasn't just about memory. It was about release, as if he was trying to make sense of it all, or maybe even let go of things he had carried for too long. Despite how revealing those writings might be, there has been no real push to share them publicly. For now, they remain private, something kept within the family. But there's a quiet understanding that if they were ever released, they would offer a raw and unfiltered look at a life that was anything but ordinary. In his final years, Kristofferson seemed most at peace in Hawaii, surrounded by Lisa, their children and grandchildren. The pace of his life slowed, but the meaning behind it felt clearer than ever. He had lived through extremes, success and struggle, love and loss, clarity and confusion, and came out the other side with a simple outlook. Looking back, he saw his life as full, shaped by experience more than perfection. And in the end, the way he chose to live came down to a few guiding principles: to be honest, to create with feeling, to find joy in the work, and to love deeply. For him, that was what mattered most when everything else faded into the background.